Welcome to Pulse Check, where we have quick conversations about how to help people in Alabama live healthier lives. Today's episode is a little different. We are talking about food, but we're also talking about ways that impact our health that we don't think about, and that is gathering around the table. Joining me today is Stacey Little, creator of the wildly popular Southern Bite food blog, Wall Street Journal bestselling author, TV personality, cookbook writer, and one of the South's most recognizable voices in approaching home cooking. For years, Stacey has built a community around recipes, Southern traditions, and the idea that food is about far more than what's on your plate. It's about connection, family, comfort, and bringing people together. His recipes and stories have reached millions through southernbite.com and appearances on major platforms like Food Network, Today, and Guy's Grocery Games, where Guy Fieri had called Stacey's fried green tomatoes the best he ever had. So I need to get a hold of some of those. But what I love most about Stacey's message is this. He believes getting families back around the table, back around that dinner table, that traditional, what we always used to do. He believes that is not just for our stomachs, but for relationships, routines, stress reduction, and overall health and well-being. So Stacey, I feel like you've got a lot to share. I'm excited you're here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So you said food is how we show love in the South. What do you mean by that?
One of the things that I always talk about as Southerners, we tell people we love them by cooking for them. But I'll say this too, in the South, it's not just about feeding people. If you think about it, it's how we celebrate pretty much everything. Somebody has a baby. We're going to show up with food. Someone loses a loved one. We're going to show up with a casserole, to tell them we're thinking about them. We have family or friends that come to town. We're going to cook their favorite foods. We don't necessarily say, I love you out loud, but we will, fry some chicken and send you home with leftovers. I think that's just one of the unique things that we Southerners do is we tell people we love them by cooking for them.
That's such a good point. Whenever I'm at my mom's house, for example, she'll overcook and then she'll say, y'all take some for lunch tomorrow. You're going to want to have a good lunch. Go ahead and take some. And that does take, planning on her part and effort and extra time and extra money. But I do agree that's a way that she can give me a hug the next day, right?
Sure. Absolutely.
So you talk also about getting families back around the supper table. And, I grew up, it's so funny. I grew up grabbing a plate and watching TV. My husband grew up around a dinner table. And so when we came together, to merge those two worlds, it was an interesting negotiation. But why do you think that it's so important? Why does it matter so much to get the family around the dinner table?
I grew up in a family where we sat down for supper every single night. Some nights it may be something really simple, like, a blue box of mac and cheese. Other nights it may have been a more elaborate meal, but we did that every single night. And it wasn't until I got kind of, I guess you'd say, out in the world and realized that other families didn't do that. And it was at some point when I was doing the book tour for my first book that I had conversations with people and they were talking frequently about how challenging it was to get a home cooked meal on the table. And I had spent, so much time building this brand and this platform. And in all honesty, I felt kind of lost. I wasn't sure why I had been, given this opportunity or been given this platform. And in that moment, I realized that that's what I needed to do with this. I wanted to get families back to the table. Life is pulling us in 100 different directions between work and school and soccer practice and cell phones and social media. We're all going 100 different directions. And to me, the supper table is kind of this central place where we can slow down, where we can reconnect. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine years ago, and she said, Stacey, if you think about it, each day we send our families out into the world. They have experiences, they meet people, they learn things, they all come home a little changed. And when you're able to gather your family at the table at the end of the day, you get to find out who they became that day. And, it's an opportunity to hear about each other's day, to celebrate wins, to talk through struggles, to build relationships. And, years from now, folks are not going to remember what was on the table, but they'll remember the people that are around it. And I knew that getting people back to the table gave them the opportunity to do that. And as such, I wanted to make that process easier for families. We're constantly told that you should do this, you shouldn't do that. I just wanted to say, look, you need to do what you have to do to get food on the table. Because as someone who has built a brand and a business based on the food that exists on those plates, I will be the first person to tell families that what's on the plates in many cases is the least important. And the people that are in the seats around the table are really should be the focused. So that's kind of at the end of the day, that's the important thing for me is getting families back to that table for that exact reason.
There's a lot of research now that says that kids who eat dinner together as a family around a table do better in school. They do better in life, later in life. And so we know that there's something emotionally and mentally healthy about slowing down and sharing those meals together. Can you share any conversation points or topics? You talked about how did you change today? Or like in my family, we used to do high low. Like, what was your high today? What was your low today? Can you share some fun, maybe topics or things that a family can talk about once they heat up that soup or grab that pizza, whatever it is? What are some things, some ways they can connect?
For families, I think there's so much pressure to sit down that oftentimes I think we as humans make this process a lot more complicated than it needs to be. And that goes beyond the food itself. Sometimes it's just having the people in the seats and just starting the conversation. I love the idea of starting the conversation with the high-low conversation. What was the best thing that happened to you today? What was the worst thing that happened to you today? But even still, there's a little pressure there. So sometimes it's just about getting people, to the table. There's a great story. I did cook dinner a few weeks ago, and it was terrible. I mean, it was literally a terrible meal. It was one of those meals where everything went wrong. And my family, we sat down and we were eating, and I could feel the awkwardness as everybody was trying their best to enjoy this meal that really just wasn't great. And there was this weird silence, and in some moment, I think it was my son just kind of started giggling, and we all just started laughing. And so it was an opportunity for us to laugh at the situation, to have a great time. And it started this conversation about how, even when we build things up and things don't turn out exactly the way that we expect that they are, there's still an opportunity to learn something from that. And I guess too, that's the thing about sharing meals and slowing down. We aren't designed to live life at full speed. And I think the best conversations happen over a meal, because a meal oftentimes forces people to slow down and relax just a little bit. They're not scrolling on their phones or looking at a screen. And so for me, at the end of the day, it's one of the simplest ways that we can kind of improve our relationships and our overall well-being just by sitting down and saying hello or how was your day. It doesn't have to be this complicated approach.
I'd love to hear what went wrong one day. That's a story for another day. But I think it ties in perfectly to talking about, you've mentioned this earlier in our conversation, the pressure to cook this perfect meal and maybe even this elaborate meal. And it doesn't just have to be appealing to the eye. It has to be good for you and healthy and just all these things. And so, as with anything, if something seems overcomplicated, we tend to ditch it, right? But your approach is so different from all that, perfection and elaborate. Why? Why do you think you've kind of leaned into, what the more important thing is, that we're together?
I think we do feel this pressure because of social media and kind of the world that we live in right now that our meals should look magazine worthy. But honestly, in my perception, perfection is kind of the enemy of what I think of when I think of supper. I talk a lot about how social media has created this environment where we see everybody else's highlight reels, but we see our behind the scenes. And so we kind of exist in this world where we strive for perfection that in most cases doesn't exist, especially right now. We're constantly looking for authenticity with AI and all of the other things that are happening in the digital world. We see these things these meals that have been prepared by food stylists who have all these tricks that are done, or we see images online that are never realistic because they were computer generated. And for me, again, it's not about the food. It's about getting your family to the table. And just as I was saying before about, meals don't always turn out the way that you think they're going to. And in the end, there's still something valuable in that meal. It may be the conversation. And honestly, I'd rather see a family gathered around a frozen pizza at the dinner table than eating in separate rooms or watching TV or scrolling or whatever it is. And I think too that sometimes people just need permission to make things easy on themselves. And I want to be the person that gives them permission to do that. I want to be the person that says, you know what, if you've got to use a can of cream of chicken soup or a packet of gravy mix to get supper on the table, you should do that. Because again, it's not always about the food. Sometimes it's just about getting your people there. You know, my goal has never been gourmet. My goal is just to help people get to the table, however, whatever means they need to do that.
Well, thank you for giving us permission, Stacey, to step away from perfection. Every meal is not for the gram, right? And you're right, good is the enemy of great oftentimes. So, but back to the food. Southern food, which you're famous for, southernbite.com, has this stereotype of being heavy and comfort food, but it can be healthy. I mean, it can be good for us. What do you think people misunderstand about Southern cooking?
Well, I think stereotypically people think that Southern food is all deep fried and smothered in gravy. And, you know, yeah, we're going to have some banana pudding and some fried chicken. But at its core, I think traditional Southern cooking is really built around vegetables. You know, I grew up, my grandparents had these two huge gardens. We would literally go pick in the afternoon what we were going to have for supper that night. I joke all the time and I say, you know, Southern food was really farm to table before that was a thing, because that is how, you know, how we did things. So, you know, it could have been green beans or peas or okra or squash or, you know, tomatoes or whatever it was that my grandfather was growing. That's what we had for dinner. And so I think that, you know, we have this older generation of cooks who knew how to turn like simple vegetables into something delicious, and we're kind of losing that a little bit. And I think it also perpetuates this idea that Southern food is all fried chicken. And now look, I love fried chicken and I love banana pudding, but I can probably count on one hand, and they're probably going to come for me when I say this, I can probably count on one hand the number of times that I've actually fried traditional fried chicken in my kitchen. But at the end of the day, it's really more about, you know, seasonality. It's more about resourcefulness. It's about using what you have on hand. And I think as Southerners, we've just always been really good at that. But that's not the things that we talk about. We talk about the over the top. We talk about things smothered in gravy.
I enjoyed hearing you talk about the farm and your granddad and, you know, providing whatever was, you know, had been grown recently. What is a meal? Like if you had to paint us a picture of a plate, what is a meal that takes you back home instantly?
Sure that there is a particular meal that takes me back, or kind of a particular food memory that I have. I think for me, it's more about a collection of memories that kind of create this fabric, if that makes sense. You know, I remember being in the yard with my great grandmother in her little house in Camden, Alabama, picking figs out of the fig tree. I remember she would tie aluminum pie plates to the fig tree to keep the birds from getting to them before she did. I remember being in the kitchen with my grandmother. I don't have necessarily specific memories, but I know that I was allowed to sit in the floor and bang on pots and pans at her house, and there are photos of me doing that. And it's being in the kitchen with her and my grandfather both, who were great cooks. You know, as I was saying, my grandfather always had these elaborate gardens. And so one of their goals in life, I swear, was to prepare our family for the apocalypse, because they would put up vegetables, freeze vegetables. They would make jams and jellies. And every time we would visit them, you know, they would send us home with things. It's being in the kitchen with my mom and literally watching her turn nothing into a meal, because even though we didn't really have a whole lot, her sole goal in life was to take care of her people. And she was going to do whatever she had to do. So I'm not sure that there's like one particular memory. For me, it's more about all these collective memories that kind of create this food history of my family. And sure, there are individual things. I remember being in the kitchen when I could probably barely reach the stovetop before my parents got up, making scrambled eggs. That's one of the earliest things that I remember cooking. They were probably terrible. I probably cooked them to death. They were probably rubber, but they both ate them and had had smiles on their faces. And I think it was in that moment that I realized, hey, I really like this. I really like creating something delicious and watching people enjoy it. And it just kind of blossomed into this whole thing.
First of all, thank you for the fig tree pro tip. My husband has a beautiful large fig in the backyard, and every year he's, pulling figs and trying to take really good care of it. Never heard about the aluminum pie trick from your grandmother. So, well, thanks, Grandma, for that. I'm going to be letting him know that's super fun and helpful. And that kind of goes to your point about the lost art of cooking in general, and also the lost tips that this generation and even myself, as I just referenced, don't know. We don't know what we don't know. Talked about being in the kitchen. I remember as I was raising my children, and even when my mom was raising me, kids weren't in the kitchen. We were trying to be efficient. We're trying to just get dinner on the table, trying to get it done because then you've got homework and then you've got bath time. It sounds like just being in the kitchen for a child can really help them begin to learn and understand that connection between, this group of ingredients and how it turns out at the very end. So for families who do feel disconnected or too busy, what's one small thing that somebody could do today to bring back more into family meals? And maybe the answer is just be in the kitchen. Get them in the kitchen. Let a 4-year-old chop the carrot. I don't know. But I'd love to hear from you because it sounds like you were doing that yourself at a young age. You were invited in. And so what are some things families could do today if they could implement one thing?
I think one of the things that families can do to kind of implement this idea of family meals is to be intentional. So pick one night. Don't create. I love creating lofty goals, but I have this theory that if we constantly create these goals that are never achievable, we will always end up disappointed. So create realistic goals. So pick one night a week. Maybe it's the weekend because you've got a little more time. Maybe it's, you say we're going to have dinner together on Sunday every week and just start with that one day a week. Get the family in there. Make cooking about the process, not just about the end result too. So, there's all kinds of studies that show when kids are involved in the food prep process, they are less likely to be picky eaters when they understand how all of these things come together to create something delicious. And there are simple tasks even little kids can do. Get them involved. Wash potatoes, peel potatoes, whatever it is. But again, have realistic goals. Maybe it's not this elaborate, protein and 4 sides and all this stuff. Maybe it's we're going to go and we're going to pick up a rotisserie chicken at the grocery store, but we're going to do all the vegetable sides ourselves. Be realistic about it. Not every family is just going to come in and create this, Michelin starred 5-course dinner, and that is okay. Sometimes it's just picking one little thing and starting there and find the things that you as a family enjoy. So maybe, it's a particular style of cooking, or maybe it's being adventurous. Maybe it's, different ethnicities that you want to try. Make it exciting, make it enjoyable, turn on some music, whatever it is that's going to make you enjoy the process. I think we look many times at cooking as the chore, when if we shift our perspective a little bit and be a little more intentional about enjoying the process of cooking too. But again, set realistic goals, and for most families, just pick one night and just start there and say, we're going to cook one night, and maybe even have everybody pick something different. Like maybe, you say, okay, well, you pick your favorite vegetable tonight, or you pick, a casserole that you love, or whatever it is. Now, does it matter if it all meshes perfectly together and is something that you would present on social media? It doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter. Pick the things that you enjoy and just do it. Just get in there and do it. I think that's the biggest issue with most folks, is just starting.
And that's a great way to start. Just pick a date, maybe 2 or 3 days from now, and let everybody know, hey, this is going to be our family dinner night. And then keeping in mind that time with your family over a meal isn't just once that plate hits the table. It really can be the hour before, the whole process where we're in there together and we're, doing different things, different tasks, have music playing. I love that. So really, it could be this, hour and a half or 2-hour moment once a week where we're just all together as a family and creating those memories. And those are things that really make us healthy, right? Help us be
Absolutely.
emotionally regulated and mentally safe and healthy.
We often, when we talk about healthy eating, we think about the nutritional content of the stuff that's on the plate. And while that is absolutely important, we don't always talk about the mental and emotional health that is involved with eating. And so sometimes we have to balance things. And I think it's just about finding whatever the right balance is for you and your family.
Absolutely. So, quick little fun lightning round. I'd love to know, what is your favorite Southern comfort food?
I would have to say biscuits. And the reason that I say that, and these are going to be terrible lightning rounds because I can't answer a question in any short way whatsoever. But to me, biscuits are therapeutic. It's an art. I could write 100 recipes, about how to perfect a biscuit, but until you've been in the kitchen with someone and they've shown you what it should feel like, how tacky it should be, all of those things, and then all of the different kind of, I want to say sciencey, but I do geek out over the science of food a lot. Until you've had somebody show you that, there's just something about that biscuit process. And too, I remember being in the kitchen with my great grandmother and my grandmother and my mom, who oddly enough all make biscuits very differently. So if I had to pick a favorite, I'd say biscuits.
Very good. What I love about biscuits is you're talking about 100 different ways for the biscuit itself. There's a million different ways to top a biscuit, from tomato gravy. Do you have a recipe for that? It's my
I,
favorite.
I do.
I love tomato gravy and
Yeah.
chocolate gravy. I've heard of that. Never tried it. Your regular sawmill sausage gravy, all the different fun things. So I'm with you on biscuits. Well, what do you think is the most underrated Southern dish and why?
Golly. You know what? I grew up as a kid I am told, I would refuse a bowl of ice cream over a second helping of collard greens. And so I guess I would probably say something like greens is probably the most underrated Southern dish, because in the South, we cook those kind of vegetables, greens, and things a little differently. So in terms of underrated, I would say collard greens, because when they're done right, they're so good.
It's hard to get kids to eat those. I myself didn't eat them until I was in my adulthood, but I love them. In fact, my mom cooks on Tuesday night and the family goes to her house. And so I just had collard greens last night. It's my favorite. You'll have to tell me later your favorite pepper sauce that you put
Got
on it.
it.
What's your funniest kitchen fail? You mentioned a few minutes ago that last week or in the last couple of weeks, you had a dish that just didn't go great. Was that your funniest, or is there something else that you would consider your funniest kitchen fail?
Well, when we talk about kitchen fails, I'm going to also say I'm going to fail at the lightning round, because this one too is going to be a little lengthy. But the funniest story that I have is early on in kind of my food career, I had decided that we were no longer going to have canned cranberry sauce for Thanksgiving. And so I had decided that I was going to make homemade cranberry sauce. And so I found a recipe. Yes, it was a little elaborate. I had, grated orange peel, and I had all the things and all the molten liquid, that red molten liquid from the cranberries. And the goal was to transfer all of that to a blender and blend it until smooth. Well, I will say at this point, I had an all white kitchen. And the reason that's important is because as I was preparing to blend said molten red liquid, I did not have the lid on. And anybody who has tons of experience in the kitchen knows that when you're going to blend a hot liquid, that hot liquid is going to expand. And so what happened was, of course, it blew the lid off and slung, hot, sticky cranberry sauce all over the kitchen. And this only gets funnier because I got it all cleaned up. Even the dog had, cranberry sauce on her. Got it all cleaned up. And I realized, there's a little bit left in that blender. I think I can probably salvage enough to have for Thanksgiving. So I go to plug the blender back in, not realizing that when I stopped it before, I simply unplugged it and didn't actually turn the blender off. And of course, did not place the lid back on because it wasn't going to be on. But when I plugged it back in, it spun again and flung it all over the kitchen once again. And so I cleaned it up. And so we have a rule at our house now that we will always have canned cranberry sauce because of that particular instance.
That is hilarious. I can just picture a white kitchen and
Yep.
red, sticky, sugary, warm, hot juice just everywhere. I'm sorry that happened.
Everywhere.
But I remember my husband kind of early in our marriage, he's an adventurous chef, cooker person himself. He's not a chef, but he likes to cook things. And he did a very similar that had orange. You would peel the orange, you do the orange zest in it, and it was fine, but it wasn't, my jelly that I like on my dressing. So I ate
Yeah,
it, but like separately from my dressing with my canned stuff.
there's something nostalgic, about food too. And, if you've grown up with that canned cranberry sauce, there's just nothing that will replace it. Are the other things delicious? Absolutely they are. But it doesn't necessarily replace that jellied, canned cranberry sauce that's still in the shape of the can.
Absolutely. And it was delicious, but I ate it as like a separate side, almost
Right.
like a sweet at the end versus a dessert. But
Right.
is there a pantry staple that you can't live without and that you think we all need?
Probably controversial, but I would probably say a can of cream of something. Is it the healthiest thing? No. But you know what? We have been using cans like that to create meals for generations. And I think that it's a great tool to have for last minute because you can just about mix any protein with a can of cream of something and create some kind of dish out of it. So if I had to pick one pantry staple, I would probably say that would probably be the one that I likely always have a couple variations of.
You're so right. And that's another thing that has gone by the wayside. Because if you go to my mom's, you can open her pantry and you can create something between what's in her pantry, her fridge, her freezer. You can come up with a whole meal. Like she just knows how to buy all these different things. For me, if I'm cooking a thing, then I've gone to the store and I bought the exact things that I need for that meal, right? And so it's harder to be off the cuff when you do it that way versus if you just learn and get in the cadence of, okay, we will use these things eventually, like rice, can of this, the protein you were mentioning. So, but my last question for you is what do you think most people across Alabama are actually craving? What are we seeking besides the food itself?
I think for the most part, Alabamians are not craving a particular food. I think they're craving connection. I think we live in a world where we're going 100 miles an hour in 14 different directions. I think we live with the pressure of social media to create perfection. I think we see online all of these meals that look like they came out of magazines, and you throw AI into all of this, creating images and recipes that are essentially fake and would never be achievable in real life. I think Alabamians are craving connection. They want real people, real meals, real families. They want a chance to slow down. They want a chance to be with their family. And a selfish plug here. I have a book coming out in the fall that is just it's built just around that. It is filled with 100 recipes that are quick and easy that is designed to just help people put food on the table so that they can get their families around it.
That well, that leads into the next thing too is, first of all, I appreciate you being here, sharing your story. You're so interesting. You've done so much. We talked about that earlier, and I wanted people to be sure that they could find, you mentioned it, I mentioned it, southernbite.com, but where else can we find your content, buy your next book, look for old books that you've written? Like, how can someone who's watching this get to you?
Yep, yep. Of course, the website's the main source, southernbite.com, but then we're on all the social media platforms at Southern Bite. First book is available anywhere books are sold online and digital, copies in stores. And the new book is available for pre-order now. It'll be out in the fall in the same locations. Anywhere you buy books, you'll be able to find that book as well.
Perfect. And keep us posted if you're going to do any local book signings. That's awesome.
We will certainly do that.
Thank you. And if you want more information about Pulse or you want to view more stories like this one, you can check out our list of blogs at alabamapulsemagazine.com. You can sign up to get your copy. And then also, of course, as always, if you have any suggestions about who we should invite or topics we should cover, please let us know in the comments. Until next time.